Gurkhas. Gurkhas are soldiers whose reputation was built less on numbers and more on a blade nobody wanted to see drawn. Recruited from the hill regions of Nepal, they became famous fighting for the British after facing them in battle first and impressing their opponents enough to be recruited rather than simply defeated. Their signature weapon, the kukri, is a curved knife designed for close-quarters fighting, and tradition holds that once it's drawn, it isn't meant to go back in the sheath without drawing blood. Enemy soldiers in multiple wars reported genuine fear at the mere mention of Gurkha units nearby, less because of overwhelming force and more because of their reputation for calm, silent, close-range combat. They're still an active fighting force today, over 2 centuries after first facing the army that eventually recruited them. Few units on this list have kept their fearsome reputation running continuously for that long. Zulu warriors. Zulu warriors turned a completely reorganized fighting style into one of the most feared militaries in 19th century Africa. Under King Shaka, traditional long-throwing spears were replaced with a shorter stabbing spear meant for close combat, forcing warriors to fight face-to-face rather than at a distance, which demanded serious discipline and nerve. They fought in a tactical formation nicknamed the Buffalo Horns, where a central group engaged the enemy directly while 2 flanking groups swept around to encircle them from both sides. At the Battle of Isandlwana in 1879, this exact strategy delivered one of the most significant defeats a colonial European army suffered against an African force in that era. Their discipline, speed on foot, and coordinated tactics made them a fighting force that outside observers consistently underestimated. Usually only once. Apache warriors. Apache warriors mastered a kind of warfare that had almost nothing to do with direct confrontation, and almost everything to do with never being where the enemy expected. Operating across the harsh desert terrain of the American Southwest, they became experts in guerrilla tactics, striking fast, vanishing into landscape most outsiders considered unlivable, and using their knowledge of the terrain as a weapon in itself. Leaders like Geronimo became infamous for evading much larger, better-equipped forces for years at a time, turning pursuit into a demoralizing, endless chase. Their ability to survive and fight in extreme conditions with minimal resources made conventional military tactics largely useless against them. Entire campaigns by better-funded armies ended not in decisive battles, but in exhausted withdrawal, unable to pin down an enemy who refused to fight on anyone else's terms. Maori warriors. Maori warriors developed one of the most psychologically intense forms of pre-battle intimidation in military history, and it's still performed today. Before combat, warriors performed the haka, a coordinated chant involving forceful movements, rhythmic stomping, and aggressive facial expressions designed to project raw power and unity to the enemy standing across from them. Their primary weapons included the taiaha, a long fighting staff used for both striking and thrusting, requiring years of training to use effectively in close combat. Maori society was also structured heavily around warrior culture, with fortified hilltop settlements called pa built specifically to withstand siege and organized defense. European explorers who encountered Maori warriors for the first time often described the experience as genuinely unsettling, long before a single weapon was drawn. Sometimes the most effective part of a fight happens entirely before it starts. Aztec Eagle Warriors. Aztec Eagle Warriors were an elite fighting class within the Aztec military, and reaching that rank required proving yourself in combat before you were allowed to wear the title at all. Named for the eagle, a symbol closely tied to the sun in Aztec religious belief, these warriors wore elaborate feathered headdresses and carved wooden armor designed to intimidate as much as protect. Their primary weapon, the makuahuitl, was a wooden club edged with sharpened obsidian blades, capable of inflicting devastating wounds despite lacking metal entirely. Warriors advanced in rank based specifically on the number of enemy combatants they personally captured alive for ritual purposes, making individual battlefield performance directly tied to religious and social standing. Spanish conquistadors who fought against Aztec forces described their ferocity and discipline as some of the most formidable they encountered anywhere in the Americas. Ninja. Ninja were less a battlefield army and more a specialized shadow operation, and that's exactly what made them so feared. Operating in feudal Japan alongside the more visible samurai class, ninja specialized in espionage, sabotage, assassination, and infiltration rather than open combat, often succeeding specifically by avoiding a fight entirely. Their training emphasized stealth, disguise, and the use of everyday tools repurposed as weapons, since carrying obvious armaments would immediately give away their presence. Much of what's assumed about ninja today is exaggerated by centuries of folklore, but their actual historical role as covert operatives made them deeply unsettling to any lord who suspected one might already be inside his walls. Unlike almost every other warrior on this list, their reputation was built on being feared without ever being seen, which is a far harder thing to defend against. Persian Immortals. Persian Immortals were the elite royal guard of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, and their name alone was meant to project a specific kind of psychological dominance. Roughly 10,000 strong, they earned their name either from the belief that fallen soldiers were immediately and secretly replaced, keeping their numbers eternally constant, or from Greek mistranslation of a Persian word for a similar concept. Historians still debate which. Heavily armored and highly disciplined, they served both as battlefield infantry and as the personal guard closest to the king himself. Their most famous appearance in Western history comes from the Battle of Thermopylae, where they were part of the force that eventually overcame a much smaller Greek defense after a secret mountain path was revealed. Whatever the literal truth behind their name, the psychological effect on enemies facing a supposedly unkillable elite force was very real. Roman legionaries. Roman legionaries built one of history's most feared militaries, not through individual heroics, but through an almost industrial level of discipline, training, and organization. Each legionary trained extensively in formation fighting, engineering, and logistics, capable of building fortified camps, roads, and siege equipment in the field almost as efficiently as they fought battles. Their standard formation, the testudo or tortoise, involved overlapping shields on every side and above, creating a nearly impenetrable moving wall against arrows and thrown weapons. What made Rome's legions so dominant across centuries wasn't any single tactic, but consistency. Replaceable, standardized training meant that even after devastating losses, entire legions could be rebuilt and sent back into the field within a season. Enemies of Rome quickly learned that defeating one legion rarely meant defeating Rome's ability to simply send another. Samurai. Samurai were the hereditary warrior class of feudal Japan, bound to a strict code of conduct known as bushido that emphasized honor, loyalty, and discipline above personal survival. Trained from childhood in swordsmanship, archery, and military strategy, a samurai's katana became so closely associated with the class that the sword itself is often treated as a cultural symbol of the warrior who carried it. Their willingness to end their own lives through ritual seppuku rather than face capture or dishonor made them genuinely unpredictable opponents to enemies who assumed self-preservation would eventually override loyalty. Samurai served specific feudal lords for generations, and entire clans built reputations across centuries based on the battlefield conduct of their warriors. Few warrior classes anywhere combined lethal combat skill with such a rigid, almost philosophical relationship to death itself. Vikings. Vikings earned a reputation across medieval Europe that turned the mere sighting of their longships into a signal to abandon coastal settlements outright. Originating from Scandinavia, Viking raiders combined speed, surprise, and shallow draft ships capable of sailing up rivers most invading forces couldn't reach, allowing them to strike inland settlements that assumed themselves safely out of reach. Their warrior culture placed enormous value on dying in battle, tied to beliefs about the afterlife that made retreat culturally shameful rather than simply tactically undesirable. Berserkers, a specific class of Viking warrior, were described by contemporary accounts as fighting in a trance-like fury, sometimes without armor at all, relying purely on aggression and intimidation. Monasteries across the British Isles became such frequent, undefended targets that entire prayers were written specifically asking for protection from Viking raids by name. Mongols. Mongols built the largest contiguous land empire in human history, and they did it with a fighting force that terrified enemies before a single arrow was fired. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, Mongol armies combined extraordinary horseback mobility with disciplined, coordinated tactics, allowing forces to cover distances and strike with a speed no medieval army could reliably anticipate or outrun. Mongol horse archers could fire accurately at full gallop, using composite bows capable of outranging most opposing infantry weapons, effectively shredding enemy formations before they ever closed to melee range. Cities that resisted were frequently made deliberate, brutal examples specifically to encourage the next city in their path to simply surrender without a fight, a psychological tactic as calculated as any military maneuver. By the height of their conquests, entire regions surrendered on reputation alone, having heard exactly what happened to the last city that didn't.